So I'm going to go through the world's biomes and talk a little bit about temperature, precipitation, and also talk a little bit about the major human influences on that biome so that you will be able to write towards those when asked. Start with the tundra. Tundra is located at the very northern part of, especially close to the Arctic Circle, and we're talking about the northern part of the continents. The tundra is an area that has temperature range of -70 to about 50 degrees above. Unfortunately, for the life in the tundra, most of the time that temperature is below freezing. So one major feature of the tundra is permafrost, and permafrost is just like it sounds, permanently frozen soil year-round. So if you live in the tundra, you're going to have to be able to, and you're any kind of a plant or an animal, you're going to have to be able to deal with that extreme of temperature. Also, the tundra, very low in precipitation, 6 to 10 inches per year in precipitation. And most of the time, that's going to be frozen precipitation. Tundra does have a very short thawed season in which life really tries to spring forth and grow. A lot of our waterfowl populations on the planet migrate up to the tundra, spend their reproductive time there, and try to get out of there before things freeze up, but it's a very short thawed period in the tundra. Tundra typically is lacking in features. It looks more like an ice desert more than anything, not totally frozen all the time. However, there are some plants and some animals that try to make it in the tundra. Those are typically very low to the ground. That's where you'll find most of the sun's energy on any given day, if there is sun. There's going to be more temperature or more heat closer to the ground. So most of the plants and animals are going to be those that live close to the ground. We are going to have some animals that herd caribou. You might know of reindeer. They typically stay in packs and move. They migrate in and out of the tundra as necessary. But typically the tundra is a very harsh climate. We think that the tundra may have a lot of oil reserves, and a lot of people want to get to those oil reserves. However, the tundra is a very fragile ecosystem. It's a very fragile biome. Anytime you have any kind of construction that tries to move in and take advantage of some of that, you could run the risk of having some major impacts there. So we have to tread very carefully in the tundra. So drilling for oil is an issue. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge located in Alaska has been at the heart of a long series of controversy about whether or not to allow oil companies to come in and drill. That's a case study that is of extreme importance to both scientists and oil companies and politicians. Climate change resulting in less species diversity is another issue for the tundra. If it gets warmer, the tundra could undergo a massive change to more of a grassline setting. If the Earth continues to get warmer, that freezing, thawing thing might just turn into more of just a permanent thaw, and that would result in a huge change there. And then loss of species in a lot of the biomes, loss of biodiversity is an issue. Let's move south a little ways into the taiga. The taiga, sometimes called the northern coniferous forest, because these are trees. This is more of a treed setting now. You move just far enough south from the tundra that trees are able to start to take hold. And some of that moisture is not frozen permanently, not as much permafrost in the taiga. Temperature range here is -65, but it does get up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Annual precipitation 12 to 30 inches a year, a little bit more than the tundra. Animals and plants that you might expect to see there, herds of caribou moving out of the tundra into the taiga. The red fox, wolves exist here, a lot of conifer trees. Okay, but again, this is still a pretty harsh environment. You have to be a furred animal. You have to be a tree that can shed snow and ice and be able to withstand those freezing temperatures to be able to survive there. Let's look at some of the human impacts. This is an area that's been overly harvested for tree harvesting. You may or may not be familiar with the fact that trees are the basis for paper production. And so a lot of the paper on Earth that's produced from tree pulp, those trees come from the taiga environment, the taiga biome. And those trees are ground up, turned into pulp, and then pressed out into paper. So overharvesting of trees leading to deforestation has been an issue. A climate change could impact this biome as well. And then again, loss of biodiversity, loss of species because of human impacts, maybe overhunting. This is an area that was heavily trapped during the 1800s, trapping for animal hides. So we do have that issue still lingering in the taiga. The Mediterranean/chaparral biome is kind of an unusual biome. It's not widely found. However, it is found around the Mediterranean and also on the west coast of North America. This is a kind of a dry but a very pretty biome. It typically exists along ocean areas or along sea areas. The annual temperature range 40 to 90 degrees, annual precipitation range 20 to 30 inches per year, so not real heavy amount of rain, but not deserty, and definitely a little bit more rainfall than the taiga. So you can see a pattern here that we're actually looking at these biomes in order of increasing rainfall. What are some of the issues with the Mediterranean/chaparral biome? Well, this is a picture of it. It's a very beautiful place to live, and the climate typically is real conducive to human habitation, so that leads us to the issue. Major environmental issues is overbuilding, overcrowding by humans, leading to destabilization of the sloped areas. The Mediterranean/chaparral biome typically is an undulating type biome, and people want to live there because they have views of the Mediterranean, they have views of the Pacific Ocean. Build a lot of houses there. If it does rain, a lot of times there's erosional problems, destabilization of slopes. Fires are a big issue in the chaparral because it does tend to dry out during the year. Climate change can impact this biome as well. And then loss of species, again, because of overbuilding, overcrowding by humans, loss of biodiversity. A lot of endangered species inhabit that particular biome. Let's talk about grasslands of the world. In different countries, you might hear grasslands called prairies, steppes, pampas, depending on what country you're in. Typically, grasslands are grasslands because it doesn't rain enough to support tree growth. You may have scattered trees that are adapted to living in really dry environments, but for the most part, grasses dominate the grasslands, which is why we call them grasslands, obviously. Temperature range, -20 to 100 degrees, so a very wide temperature range. Typically, a very tough place to live for creatures. Gets really cold at night, really hot during the day, really cold in the winter, really hot during the summer. Grasses have to be able to survive those extremes, and if you're going to be an animal or an insect that lives off of those grasses, you're going to have to be able to withstand those temperature ranges and those conditions as well. Annual precipitation is only 10 to 30 inches. And so I often ask students, why aren't there trees in the grassland? And a lot of times they think because people cut them down. No, there were never trees there to begin with. The amount of precipitation did not support tree growth. So that's why some of the early settlers in North America had to learn to make houses not out of wood, either out of rock or out of sod, grass sod. And so that's why we have sod houses like in the middle of North America. Not now, but back in the day. What are some of the human issues of the grasslands? Loss of habitat due to farming and ranching. Approximately 95 to 99% of the grasslands of North America have been converted to farm and ranch lands, and that's a major issue because when you convert grasslands into farmland or ranch land, those species, those natural species that used to exist there, typically are driven into the last remnants of what used to be wide open grasslands. And so farming and ranching have really reduced biodiversity, loss of species there. Climate change, again, can impact grasslands. Desertification is an issue that you will hear more about as we go forward, but desertification is a grassland becoming more like a desert. So as climate gets warmer, grasslands have a tendency to move more towards a desert condition. Fire prevention. This is something that I think is really interesting because typically fire prevention we think of as a good thing. But we found through research that in the grasslands, preventing fires actually allows species to grow that normally would not grow. So there's been a lot of research done recently on allowing fires to burn to continue to create the natural environment for all of the species that used to inhabit a fire-burned ecosystem. And then just overbuilding and overproduction in those areas. Temperate deciduous forest, it's one of the prettiest biomes on the planet. You can see that pretty much the eastern half of North America and most of Europe is considered, and into some of the Asian areas considered to be temperate deciduous forest. The word deciduous means to fall off. And so if you have a deciduous appendage, it falls off. If you have a deciduous leaf, it falls off. And typically, and the word temperate means gets hot and gets cold. So temperate deciduous forests have a temperature range -10 to about 95 degrees above Fahrenheit. Annual precipitation is quite a bit higher, 30 to 60 inches per year. This biome is one of the prettiest biomes on the planet, and because it's so pretty, a lot of people want to live there. So anywhere that humans really like to live are going to be highly impacted, obviously highly impacted biome. Major environmental issues: deforestation due to human activity, water pollution due to runoff from increasing use of impervious materials. Impervious means water cannot penetrate. Impervious materials would be roadways, parking lots, buildings, etc., that cause water that used to be able to infiltrate into underground areas. Now that water runs off, and with that runoff water, you get a lot of pollutants. And when we talk about water pollution, we'll examine those a little bit closer in detail. And then loss of species, again, because of human building and the actual conversion of temperate deciduous forest into housing divisions, shopping malls, highways, businesses, etc. Last biome we'll talk about right now is the desert. And the desert is a desert, like we said earlier, because of the lack of rainfall. Rainfall here, temperature range very extreme, 30, actually it should be -30 up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on what desert you're talking about. Annual precip, less than 10 inches of rain per year. And the deserts have a tendency to lie just off of the equator, north and south of the equator, just a little bit. And you might have heard about these areas in sailing ship lore. It's called the horse latitudes. Those are areas where we have areas of descending wind, descending air, and typically descending air means lack of rainfall rather than rainfall. But deserts have their own unique issues. This happens to be a shot of Joshua Tree National Park that's in western United States. You can see that the trees in these areas are more like cacti. And cacti can range from very small cacti to very large cacti. They're not typically what we think of as trees, but they do incur photosynthesis. They do have leaves, which are modified spines to conserve water. Deserts have human issues. Major environmental issues include overuse by humans, human encroachment. Cities like Phoenix, Arizona are built in the desert. People have migrated to the desert for various reasons. One of them used to be health reasons. It's easier to breathe in the desert. Back in the early part of the 1900s, doctors would recommend that people that have lung issues move to the desert areas so that they can breathe easier. This led to quite an inflow of humans into desert areas. And again, climate change and lack of or loss of species is an issue in the desert as well. Tropical rainforest. I thought we were done, but no. Let's talk about the highest annual precipitation of any of our biomes in this tropical rainforest. Typically, tropical rainforests lie right at the equator. The deserts are just off the equator because of descending air, and tropical rainforests are just on the equator because of rising air. Anytime air rises, air has a tendency to lose moisture in the form of rainfall. So you'll see tropical rainforests along the equator and on almost every major continent area. Annual precipitation can be up to 260 inches of rainfall per year. That means that most days it's going to rain. Temperature range only 70 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a very narrow temperature range compared to that desert, which could be -30 up to 120. Tropical rainforests are most productive places on the planet. High biodiversity levels. They're some of the toughest areas for humans to colonize, but as we've gotten better mechanically, we've been able to move into those and take those over. One of the bigger issues has been deforestation due to things like slash and burn farming, the building of cities. The bigger problem here is fragmentation. And fragmentation, when we talk about the loss of species, fragmentation is chopping an environment into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Research shows that when you chop environments into small pieces, you have a tendency to lose the biggest species first, and species continue to decline as you do more and more of that chopping. And again, climate change and loss of species in the tropical rainforest are also issues as well. Okay, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about ecosystem structure.